and give a brief statement. Mike Burke, our Chief Operating Officer, is going to talk about some of the progress we've made, and then we're going to have questions. Dr. Avossa?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for being here today. I'd like to thank the thousands of our employees who worked so hard to make sure that our schools were ready. 99% of the opening went very well, and I'm very proud of the work that was done. I visited 10 schools this week, and I saw our teachers engaged in great teaching, and more importantly, I saw and witnessed our students engaged in great learning, and that's why we're all here. Unfortunately, as you all know, we had some major issues with our transportation department this week. And although we've seen some improvements, we had about 40% of our buses that were running late on Monday. Today that number has dropped to 26%. Although I applaud the progress that's been made, it's not fast enough, particularly for those parents and students who are negatively impacted by that lack of progress. Again, I do appreciate the progress that we've made, but it's not sufficient. I want to take a moment and ask our business community, like I did today at the Chamber of Commerce, to be patient with their employees. If we've got employees who've run late this week or will run late early next week, I ask that you work with us and work with them, as our students are our top priority, and our businesses have responded to that. And I just ask that they please, again, work with us. The bulk of the changes that Mr. Burke will talk about will be implemented early next week. This weekend, we will have all hands on deck, mechanics and others making sure that our buses are fueled up, operating and ready to go for Monday morning. All the routes that have been corrected this week and hand-developed will be entered online, and we'll begin contacting all the impacted parents and communicating with them about the new routes and times. To provide further detail on our progress and the work we still have ahead, I'd like to call on our Chief Operating Officer, Mike Burke. Mr. Burke?
Good afternoon. I just want to speak a little more in detail about what's going on kind of behind the scenes to correct the issues we have. And as I mentioned Wednesday, our big issue is really correcting the routes, to get the routes so that they allow adequate time for the drivers to get to school on time. And there's a core routing team that had been working throughout the summer. They had about 6 people on it. We have tripled the size of that team. I've recruited staff from the financial areas and our information technology department. These are high-level staff members with a great deal of expertise in various computer systems and great attention to detail. And that staff has been working this is their 3rd day, and they'll be working throughout the weekend as well to process all of the routing changes. And they are making tremendous progress. That plan is working very well, and we are essentially going to correct the routes, have those complete by this weekend, and then our next big challenge is communicating the route changes to our parents, our students, our bus drivers, and the schools. So we have a communication plan. Given the volume of these changes and making sure that we allow enough time for the word to get out, the bus stops times are changing. That's going to carry on. It's going to be staged into early next week, as Dr. Avossa mentioned. So that communication will be coming through to schools. We're going to use school-based telephone calls to the parents, and then we're going to communicate directly with the students and hand them adjusted paper routes, when school begins early next week, that they can take home so that they have adequate notice of the pending changes. We're confident that these kind of systemic changes will result in more dramatic improvement to our on-time buses. The improvement we're seeing this week is really dealing with issues kind of almost on an individual basis, fixing things here and there, but the big fixes are going to be implemented early next week, beginning Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I also want to mention that we'll have 10 to 12 new drivers joining our force next week, and the recruitment effort and training will continue. I'm also working with our human resource department. We've identified some staff within our workforce in other disciplines outside of transportation that hold a CDL license, but they may not have the full training or the passenger endorsement for a school bus. But we're looking to maybe train on a volunteer basis. We're going to see if we can enlist some of those employees to help us out, get them trained up, and use them to help augment the bus driver workforce. The last thing I want to mention is another piece that will be open this weekend is our call center. It'll be open tomorrow, Saturday, from 8:30 to 1:30, and the phone number is 242-6565. And that concludes my prepared remarks. Thank you.
You guys, we'll open it up now for questions. I'll bring Dr. Avossa back up. Remember, since this is being recorded, I'll need to bring the mic to each of you, so if you could just raise your hand.
What's the number of routes that are changing, or the percent of routes and stops that are going to be changed?
Yes, we have 649 routes, and the vast majority will be changing to some extent. And the reason for that is, if you caught my remarks Wednesday, most of our routes serve all three levels of our schools: high school, then on to elementary, then to middle. And we are changing, with the exceptions of a few choice schools like Dreyfus, which may have its own changes, but we are essentially changing our pickup times for high schools. And when you change to high schools, that in turn that basically impacts all of the schools down the line. So I do not have an exact count for you today, but I can tell you that a great number, the majority of routes are going to have some adjustments. And those adjustments may range, from one extent, some may be more significant than others.
And how are you basing these changes? Is it based on the new routing system where a computer kind of decided how the routes were going to be, and now the drivers are putting their input in and saying this can't work?
Yeah, excellent question. That was something I probably should have addressed. The changes, we had the initial routes were generated by the routing system. Those are basically the routes we've been running this week, and that the problems became evident. We have since then worked with our drivers through their 6 area compounds. So the drivers report back to their supervisors. We've captured their input, and those are basically the changes we're making now through the drivers, and then through the benefit of their supervisors and their expertise. And we're asking that each compound has signed off and said, yes, these are the changes that need to be made. We handed those over to our team, the expanded team in the routing room, and they are processing those at a very good speed. It's moving quick.
The school district spent $217,000 to buy this new routing system.
Correct.
Now we're hearing that these routes are going to be revised. Was this system a failure? And how many days was this system tested before you rolled these buses out to pick up these children?
As I mentioned before, the implementation was rushed. I would say, the implementation was poor. I would not criticize the system itself. I think, the system is widely used across the country. It is newer technology. It is going to allow us to have the type of online tracking and incorporate the GPS information that is, not uncommon across other large school districts. So I don't really blame the system. I blame more the management of the project and our implementation, and not affording enough time for testing and training.
How many days was it tested before you let it on the road?
Well, we had one mock run, which is what we've done every year. The Thursday before school, the drivers had their routes, and they do basically a dress rehearsal with no students on board.
Was it clear at that time that something was wrong?
That's when, the need to make changes to the routes began to surface. The drivers had to run their routes, and yes, as I look back at this, and I have more information now than I did at the time, but yes, that's when things became evident, and then certainly into Monday as they ran into the traffic patterns, and doing a real run with students on board. The loading of students and unloading of students, that slows things down too, whereas a mock run, the drivers are simply driving through their stops.
It seems like every year we have issues with the buses, but that's like common, learning the route, getting used to. What do you or we have to do to make sure that it's going to be a smooth ride? Can you ever not have any problems?
There's always, in transportation with a large school district, you're always going to have some bumps in the road the first week, maybe the first 2 weeks of school. Part of that's just getting even the students familiar with their bus stop, their route. The elementary schools, sometimes the students, the first few days take longer to get off the bus, and then everybody gets into a routine. So you're always going to have some level of the need to adjust routes, to students to get enrolled and added to routes. The issue we have this year is really driven by, the problems we're having now are really, I think, a result of the implementation of a new routing system and not adequately preparing for that. And the other thing we need to really work on is to transform our department into a place where people want to work, where we have plenty of drivers and bus attendants and mechanics that are, want to be a part of the team, and we have a good culture, and we make this a nice work environment for them, because we have struggled in recent years with just retaining enough drivers and employees to run effectively. Yes, sir.
So just having left the superintendency in Fulton County Schools, I'll add that I would argue that Fulton County's Transportation Division in many ways would be considered world-class for a large urban suburban school district. And even with the fact that we had an abundance of drivers, mechanics, the culture was right, et cetera, it still takes up to 5 to 10 days to iron out the wrinkles. But I think we've been clear that this isn't about ironing out wrinkles. This is significantly more complex. This was a rollout that failed, and so this is different. Now, I told the board earlier this week that, I don't want to have this conversation next year this time. The conversation needs to be about teaching and learning, and I'm going to be putting pressure on the division to work hard to make sure that we've got the drivers that we need, and we don't find out a few days before school starts that 50 people didn't show up. We need to know about that earlier. Are there creative ways for us to put incentives in place for people to come back, make it a kind of environment where they're not looking for jobs over the summer, in fact, wanting to come back and work with us and for us?
And I think, Mike, you mentioned that there was no pilots done earlier this week, and also that now there was one test done. Did the school district ever think about doing pilots before? I know it was mentioned, and you were in one of these meetings where it was mentioned months ago that, hey, we need to do some pilot testing of this. Why wasn't there ever any pilot testing done?
I don't recall those comments. The only testing that's ever been scheduled was the one traditional mock run. Our driver's contract is a 180-day contract. We do pay him an additional day to do that mock run, but that's not built into the calendar or the contract.
And so the contract was approved about a year ago, correct?
Right. We made we contracted with the routing software. That was done in June of 2014. The purchase order was issued in August of 2014.
So what's been happening? Walk us through the timeline of what's been happening since August 2014 when it was approved. What sort of steps have been going on within the district to make sure we have the software and ready for it?
The software project was initially, it was going to be basically an 18-month implementation, and it would take place the following school year, which would be next school year. That was moved up to basically a 6-month project implementation in order to use it for this school year we just began.
Why was that? Why did that happen? Why did you decide to move it up?
Well, part of that was we were anxious to move to a place where we could have online tracking for our parents, so that we could, and we have GPSs on our buses that were in place, and we wanted to be able to kind of harness the data that comes through those GPS devices and integrate that with the routing system. We did not have that before, so we were trying to catch up with technology. We were anxious to kind of see the benefits of that. And now in hindsight, the project was rushed, and it suffered as a result.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. I'd like to thank all of our parents for the patience that they've exercised. We have sent out a letter accepting responsibility for this failed rollout. These are not uncommon issues. However, some basic project management discipline would have gone a long way in a rollout like this. So our focus right now is to continue to deliver kids on time and safely and improve the stops. I hope that by Wednesday next week I'll be able to provide better information about the improvements that we see. And I thank you all for being here. Thank you.